that. It got so bad that finally Anne Catherine Green, when she became publisher upon her husband's death in 1767, refused to print any more of these scurrilous charges against the Delaneys unless he signed his name to them. He refused to do that, but everyone knew it was Daniel Delany, the Reverend Benedict Allen attacking the Delaneys anyway. Finally, the old guy up in Frederick died, and Governor Horatio Sharp was relieved to be able to send Benedict Allen up there to take that faraway parish, the richest in Maryland. Unfortunately for him, the people in Frederick heard about him coming. They knew all about Benedict Allen from their relatives here in Annapolis, who'd been talking about this scandalous priest that they had at All Saints, or St. Anne's. And so they were determined not to have him be their minister in Frederick. And so to become the rector of a church, you have to read your induction orders from the pulpit, usually done on the first Sunday when you're being installed. But Reverend Benedict Allen realized he was going to have trouble with that. So he got to Frederick. He found the church house doors chained, so he couldn't get in. That night he found a ladder and he went up and from the inside unlocked the back door of the church. Then went out into the city and found, according to the newspaper report, an old woman and a drunken tippler barrister. So a tippler barrister, someone a lawyer who was in his cup. Took the two of them in, sat them down, went up to the pulpit and read his induction order. The next morning, he was around town introducing themselves, and everyone was scowling at him. Yeah, you're not going to be our priest. And he said, oh, you missed the induction. It was held last night. And so the next Sunday, he gets into the pulpit, and he's looking out over his new congregation. Must have been perplexed to see only women and children sitting in the pews. All of a sudden, the double doors of the church fly open, and in walks this crowd of heavily armed men from Frederick, intent on going up and dragging the Reverend Benedict Allen out of the pulpit and throwing him out of the church. The leader goes up the little curly stairs to the pulpit and starts to reach for the Reverend Benedict Allen. He whips a pistol out from underneath the pulpit and claps it to this guy's head. Which leads to an impasse. The men finally withdraw, and the Reverend Benedict Allen realizes he can never be the pastor in Frederick, and so he leaves thereafter and never comes back to Maryland again. Interestingly, his connections with Maryland don't end there. In 1782, he's living in London, and Lloyd Delany, the brother of Daniel Delany, Lloyd Delany is a loyalist, and so he goes back home at the time of the Revolution. He too is living in London. The two of them run into each other in Hyde Park, exchange words which lead to a duel, and Lloyd Delany is killed by the Reverend Benedict Allen in that duel. So for some reason, the Reverend Benedict Allen's antipathy towards the Delany family continued and ended in the death of Lloyd Delany in Hyde Park in 1782. What time? We break about a quarter after, is that right?
Yeah.
Lots. Okay, now we thank you, appreciate it. Okay, so Britain, has this huge debt, and it's just determined to figure out some way to wring money out of the American colonies. They failed with the Stamp Act. They failed with the Stamp Act in Maryland. We've been aroused once again about the proprietary prerogative with Reverend Benedict Allen, so everyone's very unhappy here. And Britain then tries in 1767 a third time, and that with the Townshend Acts. Now the Townshend Acts, at last, Parliament is getting clever. They put a tax on glass, colored lead, paint colors, paper, and tea. Now, the glass that was being taxed and the colored lead were only used by a few craftsmen, so that was going to be just kind of a minor issue for a few people. Paint colors, again, used by relatively few people, wouldn't have been a major issue for most. The paper was a size paper defined as double atlas, enormous sheets that no one in the colonies used. So going to be an issue for anyone. And then there was tea, which was used widely and extensively, primarily by women. There are first-hand accounts that say even the poorest woman would do anything she had to do to enjoy her saucer of tea in the morning. So what they were doing with the Townshend Act was taxing a whole bunch of things as symbols. They really weren't going to tick off anyone very much. And then tea. And the idea here is that the tax on tea, it had always been taxed, but this was a new tax on tea. The women would refuse to let their men in the legislative assemblies do anything to jeopardize their access to tea. So that's what Parliament's thinking, and for the first time, they had a really clever thought going here. Tax things that no one wants, set the precedent of being able to lay the tax, and then tax tea, which women won't let their husbands object to. So that's the strategy here. At least they're using a strategy for the first time. Women very much surprised Parliament, and I suppose most of their husbands here. They enthusiastically adopted a ban on drinking any tea imported from Britain. And they exchanged recipes for all kinds of substitutes, roasted grains and herbs gathered from the fields and so forth. They signed non-importation agreements. This is the famous woodcut of the women of Edenton, North Carolina, gathering together and signing their boycott petition. That was happened everywhere. Women gathered together, and they were going to do their part to oppose this oppression by Parliament. Maryland, here, the legislative response in Maryland was the lower house announced its intention to directly petition the king. Marylanders were going to send a petition to the king saying that this was wrong and that the king should intervene with Parliament to have this law repealed. Governor Sharp was horrified at the idea of the lower house, the popular house of the Maryland legislature, directly addressing the king and the fallout that he would face from the proprietor over that, and so he prorogued or adjourned the assembly. So once he did that, they could no longer do anything. They, on their way out of town, or on their way out of the building, in fact, did things, two things in particular. They joined with the other colonies in adopting non-importation as an effective way to oppose the Townshend duties, and they sent a petition to the king anyway. So they did all that after they officially had been prorogued. This played out in an interesting early event here in Maryland that we will talk about a follow-up here shortly. A ship arrived at the Annapolis harbor called the Good Intent in 1770. It was owned by two men, Anthony Stewart, a merchant here in Annapolis who lived in what is today known as the Peggy Stewart House there on Hanover Street, and his father-in-law, James Dick, who was the longtime and prominent merchant in London town, so 8 miles south of here. They jointly owned this ship, the Good Intent. They had ordered goods for their stores before the non-importation ban was approved by the Maryland merchants. It arrived in Annapolis full of goods that were now banned under the non-importation agreement. And they argued they should be allowed to land that cargo because they had ordered it before Maryland had joined the non-importation movement. The other merchants got together and decided that no, they weren't going to have any part of it, and they forced Anthony Stewart and James Dick to send the Good Intent back to England unloaded at a tremendous financial loss to the partnership. So the Good Intent, Stewart and Dick, we'll remember them here in a few minutes when we talk about the Peggy Stewart. The Townshend duty was appealed in 1770, all except for the tax on tea. Not clear why they kept the tax on tea. The others were all symbolic. Now they're gone. They kept the tax on the only thing that really mattered, the tax on tea. But the colonists, for the third time now, had forced parliaments to its knees, had made them go back on a major piece of legislation. And so for some reason the colonists decided to just say, well, you know, the tea's tax still there, but it's always been taxed since the 1660s, and we can live with that as long as we got them to basically repeal all the law except for that. So Townshend duties repealed. Third attempt to tax the colonists, again another disaster, but there still is that symbolic tax on tea. Okay, then we have a change in the proprietary administration. Now, Governor Horatio Sharp has been here since 1753. He's been an absolutely wonderful governor. He's done the best he can to placate the proprietor. He's trusted and even beloved by most of his colonists here. And he's a good guy. I mean, he's a bachelor. He's lots of fun. He builds Whitehall. He's a nice guy. Everyone likes Horatio Sharp. Even if they disagree with him on politics, you can have a good time with him. But in 1767, he's given the pink slip by the proprietor without any warning. And he announces that he's appointed a new person as governor, a man by the name of Robert Eden. Now, Governor Sharp, as I say, had done an excellent job. It had nothing to do with his job. It had to do with whom Robert Eden was married to. He was married to Caroline Calvert, after whom Caroline County is named, and Caroline Calvert was the proprietor's Frederick VI Lord Baltimore's sister. And her husband needed a job. He was in the military. That wasn't working out. So, the sister says, why not make him, governor of Maryland? That would be a pretty good job. And so, as I said, Frederick VI Lord Baltimore had no concern about Maryland or anything except getting more money out. Having a brother-in-law over there, you could put the squeeze to him to get more money out of the colony crap. So he dismisses this wonderful, very able, and much respected governor, Horatio Sharp, and puts this very untried brother-in-law, Robert Eden, into his position. Not long after he got here and settled in, a great controversy came up. I'm going to spend short shrift on it. It's called the Tobacco Inspection Act controversy. Virginia passed a Tobacco Inspection Act in 1736. That made Maryland tobacco basically non-competitive on the market because Virginia could guarantee the quality of their tobacco. We couldn't. Our hogsheads would have rocks and stems and other things buried in the middle of it because it wasn't inspected. So no one wanted Maryland tobacco. Because of this politics of irreconcilabilities between the proprietor and the lower house, and the lower house demanding control over the fee bill, the proprietor refusing to do that, it took 11 years before Maryland was able to pass a Tobacco Inspection Act of its own, 1747. It was due to sunset in 1770, October 20th to be exact. So Eden has just arrived. This important deadline is looming on the horizon because if Maryland doesn't have inspected tobacco, the economy is going to collapse because we can't compete with Virginia tobacco again. So the act has to be passed. It's an absolute given. So, this untried, untested governor goes to the legislature and says, we've got to pass a new Tobacco Inspection Act. And he said, fine, give us control over the fee bill and how much you and all the other proprietary officials get paid. That's our price. And he refused to do that. And so he resolved it finally. And it expires October 20th of 1770. Maryland's tobacco economy is on the brink of collapse. So Eden steps in and resolves this by exercising that king-like authority that the Crown has, or that the proprietor has under the Charter of 1632, by issuing the Fee Proclamation of November 26, 1710, which basically said until the legislature gets its act together and does something about this law, all proprietary officials will be paid the same that they were paid before. And so it's simply reinstated all of the fees paid to the proprietary officials and left this whole issue of tobacco inspection as something the legislature was going to have to resolve on its own. He had removed the fee bill for proprietary officials from the discussion, much to the distress of everyone in the General Assembly, of course. It became a raging controversy in Maryland for 3 solid years. In every other colony, 1770 repeal of the Townsend duties to 1773, the Tea Act, were relative quiet in all the other colonies. Here, that entire 3-year period was filled with this raging controversy over Eden's fee bill proclamation of November 1770. It led to one of the most famous pre-revolutionary political exchanges. It's in all of the history books, the documentary history leading up to the revolution. This is one of the most important exchanges in that period leading up to the revolution between 2 Annapolitans, one using the pen name Antelon, and it was Daniel Delaney the Younger, the son of Daniel Delaney the Older, and the proprietor put in those high positions in 1732. He's the son. He's the most prominent and preeminent lawyer in all of Maryland. He is a leader in the upper house of the General Assembly, so one of the staunch proprietary supporters. Very wealthy, very well connected, very well known, and a brilliant legal mind. And so he takes on this issue of the fee bill in a long, extended essay in the Maryland Gazette, defending the governor's right to exercise proprietary authority by issuing this fee bill. He's answered by someone using the pen name First Citizen. Now, First Citizen, it turns out, can take on this giant legal mind, Daniel Delaney the Younger, point by point. And in fact, it becomes very clear that he can run circles around Daniel Delaney when he really wants to. I think there are 11 essays back and forth between the two sides. Everyone reads them with great interest, and everyone knows who the two people are, Daniel Delaney and Charles Carroll of Carrollton. Carrollton's the most interesting one, more interesting of the two, because this is the son of Charles Carroll of Annapolis. He'd gone away, been educated in New York for 16 years at the Jesuit schools on the continent, then at the Inns of Court. He came back in his 26 years of age, and he was the best educated man in America by far at that point. And he was a brilliant person, and he was wealthy, and a star in every respect, except he was Catholic. He couldn't participate in the political process in Maryland because he was Catholic. Well, here this Catholic, who, like his father and grandfather, probably should have just worried about increasing the family fortune, has now jumped right in the middle of the political debate over where power properly resides. And while Daniel Delaney is defending the rights of the proprietor under the charter to exercise king-like authority, Charles Carroll of Carrollton, as First Citizen, really expands the article by the end of the debate to where it's really one of looking at power residing in the authority of the people, not in the institutions of government. So he became an instant patriot hero, and it brought Charles Carroll of Carrollton out of the obscurity of being a Catholic, a very prominent Catholic, but in right smack dab into the middle of the political opposition of the Patriot, or increasingly called Patriot, Party. Samuel Chase and William Pagan led street protests, most notably one after an election where they led a group of people, mourners with a muffled drum, with a coffin down West Street here to the city gates, and right out of the city gates there was the city gallows, and on this coffin was inscribed the fee bill, and they buried the coffin under the gallows outside the city gate. So, that kind of popular street protest got opposition to the fee bill mobilized as well. Finally, in 1773, with Maryland's economy on the verge of collapse, the legislature passed a new fee act without referencing the fee bill at all. And so Eden had won the political war, but the Popular Party had won the day because they had organized well, they had gotten so many supporters, they had become the real power in Maryland. Now we fall down to the Tea Act of 1773. The most important thing I want to emphasize about the Tea Act of 1773, it was not a tax on tea. It is not the origin of no taxation without representation. It had nothing to do with the tax on tea at all because tea was already taxed. Tea had been taxed since the 1660s. A new tax had been levied by the Townsend duties in 1767. Those had not been removed when the rest of the act was repealed in 1770. Tea had always been taxed. In fact, it was just the opposite. The Tea Act of 1770 lowered the tax on tea, where tea had never been cheaper in the colony of Maryland or any of the other colonies, ever. It made tea so cheap that smugglers, the Dutch smugglers, always were competing with the British because they could smuggle in tea and sell it cheaper than the taxed British tea. Even the smugglers couldn't undercut the cost of tea now coming in from England. Why was that? Because Parliament gave a monopoly to the East India Company in the importation of tea from the Far East and the exportation of it to the colonies. The way British taxes worked is when you brought stuff into England and you were required to bring it into England for transshipment,